Hello, I'm Martha Senator, and this is Listen and Be Heard. Our first show here on WPVM FM, the voice of Asheville, 103.7. Listen and Be Heard is a show primarily for readers and writers, and in general to promote local culture everywhere. Writers are already readers, who often influence what other people read and talk about. This is a platform for in-depth conversations with authors about new books that we've read and want to talk about the craft and trade of writing, and some of the challenges and joys of writing and speaking. Listen and Be Heard has its roots in poetry, storytelling, and open mics, so you can also expect to hear some spoken word every week. For our first show, coming to you live, I am joined in the studio by Laura Lengnick, author of Resilient Agriculture, and Bruce Spang, who will share a couple poems with us. We will listen to an interview by Tony Robles of Ann Davila Cardinal, author of The Storyteller's Death, and a couple musical surprises. Coming up first, Laura Lengnick. Please stay tuned.
You'll never be able to do that. Living it is knowing you will do it. It's speaking the unspoken. It's thinking the unthinkable. It's doing the unexpected. It's quitting before you get fired.
Laura Lengnick, thank you for joining me here at WPVF. I can't say it. WPVM FM in Asheville, 103.7. And I want to thank Davian Dial, the manager, for giving me the opportunity to bring Listen and Be Heard to you. Laura is the author of Resilient Agriculture. This is the expanded and updated second edition. And I remember reading that you were requested not to rewrite this book, but that you did. And essentially you did. And so I wanted to start out asking you, why did you write this book? Why did you feel like you needed to add so much more again to the second edition?
Well, thanks. And thanks so much for the invitation to join you today. I wrote the original. I know this is not what you asked, but it's, for me, an important part of the story. The original edition, the first edition, was written because there was a utter silence at the time that I started writing. The first edition, there was utter silence from American agriculture, from farmers and ranchers, from the people that feed us, about how they were experiencing climate change or changing weather patterns. And I learned about this silence. I had to work around this gap in the storytelling in the U.S. when I was working on a USDA report, a national report on adapting agriculture to climate change in the U.S. And what I learned during that time, which was back in 2011, was that every major in the country in the global north had a lot of information, a lot of stories from farmers, except for one. And that was our country. And there's lots of reasons for that. And I don't mean to, we don't need to talk about all of that. The main thing is that I finished that project with USDA determined to bring the voice of American farmers and ranchers into discussions around what was happening on the ground and on the front lines of climate change.
And so that first edition, how successful do you feel you were in that mission of getting that message out? I think obviously you did a lot of research, and the book itself was an accomplishment. How do you feel like it the life it has had, and if you actually managed to accomplish some of what you wanted to with that book.
Yes, I feel very pleased. I feel that I made quite an important contribution in those times, because now, speaking with farmers, hearing from farmers and ranchers in this country about the challenges that they're facing with changing weather patterns is the norm. And really, I'm not overstating it. 10 years ago, there was just nothing from farmers and ranchers in this country. So obviously
about climate change,
about how they were adapting to climate change.
Okay,
and obviously it wasn't all because of this one book, but
it was like a touchstone for people to come to and realize, like, okay, this is my experience, but I'm not the only one going through these types of experiences.
Yes, and in fact, that message I heard many, many times during the research for the book. I reached out to many farmers and ranchers, over 400 actually, for that first book. And the reaction was overall, thank you so much for doing this. Many times back in those days, farmers would decline being interviewed on the record. But everyone that I interacted with in that project, the early days of this work, were very thankful that somebody was finally bringing this story into the public.
And somehow, the stories of farmers and ranchers seem like the what do they say about the I forget which kind of bird it is in the coal mines.
Canary in the coal mines.
It's kind of like the canary song, because I came to your book as a property owner myself, a landowner who's trying to learn how to bring my, drought mitigation, fire mitigation, soil restoration, all those types of things. And so I came to your book. But it made me realize just the immediacy of climate change. So let's fast forward to the second edition.
Okay.
Because, the United Nations, a lot of people have been talking about all this now, probably since you wrote the first book, but they're still talking, right? It's still talking over the same things without much action going on. And your book made me realize, it gave me hope, but it's also scary, Maybe you could talk a little about that. Just what's the difference now with the second edition?
The second edition, yeah. Well, from my perspective, understanding that I've really been working in this area now for more than a decade, so I've seen a lot of change. And from my perspective, we're in a different world now when it comes to talking about climate change, climate action, adapting to climate change. And so from my perspective, I actually think there is a lot of action. I recognize absolutely what you're saying, that that there needs to be a whole lot more.
Right.
But compared to my world a decade ago, there's so much action taking place, and so that gives me a lot of hope. You mentioned that the some of what I write about in the book is scary, and I understand using that particular way to describe the feeling, but I like to think about it as sobering. Mm-hmm. It's bringing to readers the experience from a farmer's perspective, from people who work the land, from people who actually their livelihood depends on dependable weather. And it's bringing that experience into the reality of all the rest of us who depend on these folks to feed us. And I think the way I wish to have the reader respond is that it's sobering. This is serious. These changes happening are influencing much more than let's say, sea level rise or greater storms. I mean, there's all these subtle effects happening that are changing the very ecology of the planet.
How food grows.
Yeah, all of it. Changing all of the ecology, changing nature, if you will. And I hope that the reaction after reading these stories is just for people to wake up, for average people who are not involved in agriculture,
growing food, right,
or in other ways managing nature for their well-being. So, for example, fisher people are also, you can find stories about fisher people and how the changes they're seeing and how that's affecting what they're doing. So it's really just people who are on, I think of it as the front lines of these changes in nature that are coming along with climate change. And so I want to invite readers to recognize this is serious. It's sobering. And as you say, these folks are our social canaries in the coal mine. And the kinds of changes they're already struggling with are coming to our neighborhoods, to all of us.
Right.
So that's the sobering, or as you say, scary part. But there's another part that I think of that as the dark side of climate, the realities of climate change. But there's a light side, and I try to bring that out in the book as well. And the light side is we actually know a lot already about solutions to adapting to climate change that also serve as solutions to the drivers that are creating climate change, the ways that we live that are pushing climate change. And that's the light side, and I think it's a positive vision that has a lot of integrity. It's grounded in science, it's grounded in ecology, and it's grounded, as I point out in the last part of the book, in real world stories of resilience.
And you give a lot of great examples that I know that for my own learning curve with this I will be referring back to. But I think for people everywhere who are listening who are not growing food maybe or involved in agriculture, you have a list of 12 things you can do to cultivate a resilient agriculture. Maybe before we go down this list, you could just speak for a moment about resilience. What do you mean? Why did you choose that word?
I chose the word resilience after I learned about the science of resilience. And as I was first working on that USDA report, my job in that report was to write the chapter on adaptation. What do we know about it? What do we know? What kinds of technology, knowledge, practices can we bring to that challenge of adapting to climate change? And in the process of doing that work, I ran into the idea of resilience. And the word captured my imagination. But more than that, once I started to dig into that, what I learned is it's actually a pretty old science. And we know a lot. There's tools, there's concepts, there's terminology that we can draw on as we begin to respond or act on climate change. And in particular, there's a type of resilience science that's exactly what we need in agriculture, and it's called social ecological resilience science. Social, people, ecological, nature. It specifically provides wisdom around this idea of people and nature working together towards a goal. And I think that describes agriculture very well.
I think it does. And it also ties together solutions for climate change with better social conditions.
Yeah.
Really. Now, when we think about climate, I think a lot of us, we hear climate change and we have some vague ideas about what's supposed to fix it. Maybe it's just too much pollution, or, if we do this carbon credit thing it's going to fix things or something.
Yep.
And I think the reality, though, is that it's a very multifaceted picture. And sometimes we get very, we don't actually know, well, what can I do? We could just blame it all on the oil companies. And not that I'm trying to take any responsibility from them, but there are things that we can each do. I mean, a simple example is just collecting rainwater, right, to help improve the soil where you live. But you have 12 things that a person can do to cultivate a resilient agriculture. And number one on your list is stop wasting food.
Yes. Yes. I'm happy to, we can talk up through some of these. I'd be happy to do that. But I want to back up just a minute to something you said, which is, people who aren't in agriculture. And I want to invite your listeners, and I try to invite my readers into this idea that actually we are all engaged in agriculture. If you are an eater.
Yes.
Eating is an agricultural act. And that was actually, understanding that was what led to this list. That no matter where you stand in the food system, you can begin to cultivate a resilient agriculture.
You could even say eating is a political act.
Well,
right?
you could, and people have, and that's a active, ongoing discussion as well.
Right. So stop wasting food.
So as I was finishing up the book, I had the benefit. I had the benefit of 5 years of talking about the book, of touring about the book, of answering questions about the book, the first edition. And so I had the benefit of all that as I wrote the second edition. And it was really clear to me in that work with the first edition that eaters felt left out of that first book. It was very agriculture focused. It was very farmer rancher focused. And so in this edition, I actually wrote a different final chapter, and I brought in food much more fully. And part of what I tried to do with this final chapter for the second edition was to really speak to eaters. I like to think of eaters, but people who are working all through the food system beyond the farm gate.
Right.
And so that's where this list came from. So as I was organizing this list of actions, I thought, well, one way I could organize it is the easiest to maybe the most difficult, or some easier actions, get you started,
right.
Into more and more sophisticated or complex actions, or actions that required a change in lifestyle, for example, or perspective. So that first, stop wasting food, that is based on so much research that suggests that one of the top 5 most cost-effective I think of these as win-win solutions. They're low cost and high impact. That stop wasting food is actually one of the top 5 things we can do to act on climate change. Just eat the food that you buy. I could talk about why that is if you'd like, but it's very easy to find it online as well if you're curious.
But that's such a simple thing. It's not even saying eat less food.
No, it's
just like, don't waste it.
Just don't waste it. Exactly.
Don't throw it away.
That's right. You would think it's a simple thing, but here I'm here to admit that it's actually something that I still have to work at myself.
There is a compost pile.
There is a compost pile, but I would say that's a very low next step.
Right.
The reason is every pound of food that is wasted, even if you compost it, that pound of food goes back through the food system and takes 7 times the energy in that pound of food to produce that food that is in the food itself. That's an average, but the idea is that if you never waste that food, then that food eventually, the message will get back through the food system to not grow that food, and then you have 7 times the impact than you would if you were to compost that food.
And if you think about meat in those terms, then that's like a different thought from like vegetables in the compost pile. So when you're talking about food, you're including livestock.
Oh, sure. I'm
Right.
thinking, I think, this first step or this first thing you can do, let's keep it simple. Let's just stop wasting food.
Okay. Yeah, that's simple.
It's so simple.
Stop wasting your food,
Just stop.
folks. Just stop.
But then
stop.
just stop. Exactly. And yet I'm here to say that can be, that's not, it's an easy thing to do, and yet it can be difficult.
It can be. So let's all work on that.
Yeah.
That's a simple thing that maybe is not, but we can. We can stop wasting food.
Yes, we can.
So we're running out of time, but what is a silver bullet brand? Why stop buying silver bullet brands?
So you mentioned carbon markets earlier. What I'm trying to say here is that, and you mentioned there's no one solution. It's complex, and it's going to take a lot of different solutions, and that's exactly right. And that's what this action is really speaking to. We're not going to solve climate change if you buy a certain kind of cereal, a climate smart cereal, or really even any sort of a brand that's saying, impossible meat or
with this.
Whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to take more than consuming certain products to
that's sort
make
of
a
the
change.
elephant in the room, isn't it? I mean, when we look, it's more that we have to change the structure of how we live.
I think that's true. Yes, we do. And
as people together, and not just ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that second action is just to say, in order to solve this, we're going to have to work together to change our behavior, not change our brand.
So when we're changing our behavior, we're going to talk about one more of these, and then I'm going to encourage people to read your book and really delve into this. You say to learn a new resilient food waste skill. Mm-hmm. So when we change, we have to learn new things. So explain that just a little bit, please.
Yeah, so that's, what is that, number 5? That's
yes.
So we're getting a little deeper into the list.
Right.
And remember, I said I organized it according to kind of how much investment it requires of you to try to do the action.
So asking you to change, that's starting to...
When you're asking you to learn a new skill, that's
right.
That's starting to change. I like to think about this idea of learning new, resilient food waste skills more as remembering. So the idea of learning something new, learning something that you can take with you that's important, or that involves food preparation, food growing. You pick what it is, but re-engage.
Become connected
with food. Be more connected. Yeah, and in particular, you mentioned earlier that resilience really speaks to social well-being too, and you're absolutely right about that. That's that social ecological part of resilience, and so having a better understanding of what it takes to feed yourself and to feed others or to feed your community is a really important skill to have, or just an understanding a remembering.
Right.
A remembering of what that was like, because it wasn't that long ago that most of us in this country were engaged in farming. Not that long ago.
How long ago?
100 years ago?
Just 100
maybe
years,
150 years ago. So that's why I think of it as a remembering. As a remembering. And we have to relearn, but we also can look back in our own family stories at some point to find who in our families,
some of that knowledge.
Yeah, who knew how to do this.
In that area that you were from, too, some of that particular knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and a value of learning something about that in these times is that it used to be that we fed ourselves by community action without fossil fuels, without chemicals, without processed foods and distribution systems and freezers and all of that. Now, I'm not one of these folks who are saying go back.
Let's go back. But
what I'm saying is there are probably some really good ideas that we could bring forward and make it part of the solution to climate change.
Well, Laura, if people want to delve deeper into all these ideas, well, first of all, they could buy Resilient Agriculture. But where can they buy it, and where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, well, I like to send folks to the publisher's website. It's New Society Publishers, easy to find online, and they're a great publisher. Their tagline is books to build a new society. So they're very much focused on ideas that are going to help us bring about this change in culture that's needed for us to thrive. If folks want to get a taste of some of the stories in this book, and in the first edition, they can go to realworldresilience.com and get a sense of me and my work, but also dig into some of these farmer and rancher stories.
These stories are great, too. I mean, they really... the spirit of the people and just their willingness to try and the hard work that they're all doing, it's inspirational for me, and I'm sure it will be for many more people. Repeat your website one more time, please.
Sure, it's realworldresilience.com.
I want to thank you so much for sharing and talking with me today. And I hope that people will delve deeper into all of this. We all really need to.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're listening to the funky sounds of Fred Wesley and the New JBs. They're going to be doing a big 90th birthday party for James Brown. This weekend at the Augusta Museum of History, and it's free. It's going to be all day long from 3 to 11 p.m. this Saturday, May 6th in Augusta, Georgia. It's a James Brown birthday get-down with performance from Fred Wesley and the New JBs, which is who you're hearing right now, and the Jamp Band, and Funk You, and some surprise special guests to be announced. So get thee down there. It's free. You can party all day long. And James Brown, he's still going strong at 90. Coming up soon, we're going to hear some poetry from Bruce Spang. Bruce Spang is the former poet laureate of Portland, the author of 2 novels, The Deception of the Thrush and Those Close Beside Me. His most recent collection of poems, All You'll Derive, A Caregiver's Journey, was published in 2019, and he's the author of 4 other books of poems, along with several anthologies, and he's published in several chapbooks as well. And he's the poetry and fiction editor of the Smoky Blue Literary and Arts magazine. Thank you for joining us today. Bruce, what are you going to read?
I'm going to read a short poem. I guess since this is about resiliency, I thought I'd do a short piece, a new one that I just wrote. It's called The Long Walk. Along the path by Bent Creek, early when the light first leans between the firs and the hickories, first shimmers on the waters lulling by the bridge, we walk our 2 terriers. They tug and stick their noses in the underbrush, lift their legs, letting others know we've been here. And we too attest to that need to say we have walked here together, the miles side by side, 2 men gripping the leashes. In time, as the light lifts higher, the mist rises, and coming at us, an elderly couple, one with ski poles to keep his balance, and his wife close by, wary, halting often to gaze at the water over rocks, the shh of sound. We wave, merely say, good morning, as we pass, knowing that in years, with my knees as they are and the sore hip, we may be strolling as they are, not making time, but walking, finding some solace in the quiet, the taut leashes, and the love, yes, love, that comes from being here together.
This is a band called Earth Cry. spelled with a K. And they're on tour right now. And this weekend, they'll be appearing in a couple places in Greenville, South Carolina, my current hometown. On Friday, they will be at Jamaica Me Irie restaurant on Woodruff Road in Greenville. And then on Saturday, they'll be at Kai P on the Green, which is part of a festival that's also going to, well, I don't know if it's a festival, it's a big one-day event that will also feature Georgia John Jazz and Whitney Bradley and the Groove Planet Band. And that's all hosted by Kai P Restaurant, which you can find at kaiprestaurant.org. Stay tuned. I'm going to play an interview by Tony Robles of Ann Davila Cardinal, author of The Storyteller's Death.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Tony Robles. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard. Ann Davila Cardinal is a writer and formerly actually director of recruitment for Vermont College of Fine Arts, our alma mater, where she received her MFA in writing. She comes from a long line of Puerto Rican writers, including father and son poets Virgilio and Jose Antonio Davila, and her cousin, the award-winning fiction writer Tere Davila. Her young adult novels include 5 Midnights, Category 5, and the upcoming Breakup from Hell. The Storyteller's Death, which is what I have in my hand right now, is her first novel for adults. Ann lives in Vermont. She's very, very busy, but gets to Puerto Rico to see her family as often as she can. Ann, welcome to Listen and Be Heard. This book right here, The Storyteller's Death, wonderful, just wonderful story, wonderful narrative, wonderful title. It was 17 years in the making?
Yes, it was. It was my thesis in my MFA program, and I graduated in 2007. So, but the thing is that it's the book of my heart. You know, we all sort of have that. And I think I needed some time, and I didn't really finish it until the pandemic. And so I think it's one of those things that needed to percolate, you know, or rest for periods. But and it's a different kind of writing than my young adult writing. Not that that isn't equally as challenging. It's just a different kind, different muscles.
What I was intrigued by, you know, the story of the family legacy. It kind of reminded me of my family in certain ways. But you know, you have the protagonist Isla, who, you know, she's kind of living in two worlds. You know, like there's the world of her ancestors in Puerto Rico, and then there's the world that she lives in New Jersey. So, you know, sense of place being so important to, you know, to your story, to your book. Can you talk about the sense of place and why, and how it shapes the story and why it's so important in the story?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's in part a love letter to Puerto Rico and to my family. And you're right, there is elements of memoir. It is definitely the closest thing to my story I will write, but it's magical realist. And you know, I was able to do more with the fiction. But it's a way of honoring that, because I'm in love with the island. When I was a child and things were very bad at home, I would be sent down there for the summer by myself, and my family took care of me. And it is an incredible place, rich with history, just beautiful and complicated. And so I wanted to capture that. But I also didn't want it to be like New Jersey is this black and white and Puerto Rico's completely in color, because that's not entirely true either. And as I got to be a teen and my mother sobered up, we lived in New York City as well. So, I had this dual experience, but I used to say that in the 70s, I felt more at home on that Pan Am 47 halfway between New Jersey and the island, because that is, I didn't feel entirely at home in either place, but both were important to me. So it's very much about place, and about place, home as place, and where that is and what that means, which I guess a lot of us write about.
When did when did the bite come to actually do this? Was it something that, started way back when you were young?
I never imagined being a writer. I mean, I was an avid reader. I mean, I really believe that books saved my life at very difficult times. And so I never imagined that it was an option for me until I was at Vermont College. And so it was not a dream. I wouldn't have even imagined that a dream would be possible. So, but I was a literature freak, I studied it in college and whatever. But in terms of writing about the family, it is a way of processing my own identity, in the sense that I wanted to tell these stories, particularly because you don't hear stories about classism and racism within these cultures as often, and particularly in the middle class, or in the case of my family down there, I would say upper middle, maybe even, upper. And I was sort of faced with that. And I still get into conflicts with my family. They tell me I'm too sensitive. You're too sensitive. And it's like, no, that's racist. And so, it's been an ongoing thing. And so and that was a bit of being raised in New York and New Jersey, and then going down to the island where my family was fairly traditional. And so in telling these stories, I didn't want to just make it one-sided. I want to also explore the things that I found complicated, and I still do. And I was the poor relations. I was, and which is ironic, because to many people, our life in New Jersey was, middle class and comfortable. But I know that we struggled with money, and I went down there, and it was there were pools, and there were people who cooked for them, and it was just very different. So was I called to write the story? I don't know. I'm sure there's old ladies spinning in their graves, because I did it without any reservation about addressing some of the issues. But it is ultimately, a deep love.
Throughout the book, there's the whole thing with secrets and how that's intertwined with shame. How did you deal with that?
I go straight at it, Tony. I mean, I'm kind of, it's not that I'm ruthless, but I was raised by a truth teller. My mother was different, even though she was raised on the island. She came to go to college at 16 and never went back to live. But she was a socialist. She was a feminist at a time when that was dangerous. And though she did play the academic's wife and sort of do that role, I knew that I was raised with this belief system that people were all equal, and that, she walked the walk. And so she was a very strong, she had very strong beliefs, and I was raised by her. And so, and my father they were what they called what I'm told from my family in Puerto Rico, un poco hippie. They were, hippies at this time. And so, I was taught that truth telling is important. And especially since when I hit my 50s, I'm like, I'm all about the truth telling. And now, you get older, you care less and less what people think. So I tend to say exactly what I think, which can be complicated for everyone. But especially with my art, it is a way of doing that, and telling a story. And so that's where it's finding that balance of the truth and and story. And the thing is that this book is very much about how secrets of generational trauma, nothing heals if you keep it, if you don't put it out in the light. And so that's, I love truth telling.
Well, there were so many lines in the book that really resonated. For instance, between Isla and her mother, having a little bit too much to drink to kind of cope. And Isla says, I think geography wasn't the problem. It was the woman standing in front of me.
Yeah.
The geography of secrets. And also, you speak of visions being a gift of the dead. Were there, I guess, stories in your family about cuentistas that, I guess, it's obvious that you drew upon that. Can you speak on that more?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because the stories that the storytellers tell in the book are all family stories from the Davilas, from my family. And the reason I did that is because as a writer, as a fiction writer, I could have created family stories within the novel that brought my narrative forward, right? That would be artificial. And family stories are not neat and pat and you tell one story and your brother says that isn't how it happened, and I really like the idea that they're malleable, but they're so telling about the family themselves. So I'd used ones about my aunt used to tell me about the monkeys getting loose from the zoo, about, my great uncle being mayor of Bayamon for a month. These are true. Or there were ones I was told they're from my family, whether or not they're true. Some of them I can, I have proven, but the point is that it's like that. I didn't want to create something artificial. So I used those as the basis for the visions. And the hurricane, there's a very tense one with the hurricane, the roof coming off. That was my mother as a child in the last Category 5 hurricane on the island. I think it was 29. And so I purposely brought in my own family stories in order to illustrate. And there was a discussion about my great-grandfather shooting himself in a room that my aunt wouldn't let in. And the interesting thing about that is I said that to her brother after her death, and my mother's brother, my uncle, said, that isn't true. He died in the hospital. And I was like, oh, my God. So I've been lied to. What does that say about our family if nothing I know is true? And a cousin said, don't the stories that aren't true say as much about our family as the ones that are.
Maria. That was Maria, right? In the book. Maria in the book.
Yes. And it is true. And so, but the interesting thing is, years later, I found out from another uncle who was younger that he did shoot himself in that room, and that the other brother didn't know because he was too young. So it's like these family stories, and the old women and the people who told them, when they die, they're gone. And that was one of the inspirations for this book is, I tell people, young writers, go and talk to your relatives and bring a reporter, because one day you might really want to know, and your kids might want to know. And so that's sort of, I started writing so my son would know my family stories. And this is,
it reminded me a little bit,
down this path.
Of this notion in reading the story of something that the late Barry Lopez said when he talked about indigenous communities and storytellers, that there's a difference between the storyteller and the writer. That there's, and when you were talking about the cuentista, am I saying that right? Cuentista, when you're talking about the cuentistas,
yeah. Cuentista.
That, I guess a cuentista would be more or less the adhesive, the story keeper that really knows the history of a community, and through those stories helps keep it together. And even if those stories are mangled or misinterpreted,
well, and they make it their own in their own telling, which I loved. And it just, this is how histories were transferred originally. This is how it was passed down, and I still find it fascinating. And I think it is you were talking about the writer and the storyteller. To me, it's almost like two different arts. My first draft of a novel is my storytelling. Then you're making the material with which you're then going to make the art. And it's in the revision that the fiction piece comes in, and the, manipulation and making it but it is definitely a skill to do it orally. And I've always been enamored of that.
The mom was there's a lot of, I guess you can call it post-traumatic stress, right? She was dealing with shame. The impact of the shame and the product of that shame, that was really no fault of her own. She was kind of a victim of a lot of what was going on with that. Was some of that based on your own mother, or was that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, and this is what a lot of my young adult books deal with is the unparented. It's this idea. I was the fifth of five, unlike Isla. We had a big family, but there's a huge age difference. And so I was the only one really at home as a child. And so I had to run the household. And I don't think the stories of children in alcoholic families are told enough, because we have to shoulder so much more than our age allows. And so I write, especially my young adult, for kids and families that deal with addiction. And that I wrote a piece recently for School Library Journal of writing for the unparented. Mm-hmm. And I'm really fascinated by this idea of, you have to parent yourself. And so I hope to reach kids who are going through that, or even adults, people who had that experience, so they know. I mean, that's the best thing. When you read something, you see yourself in it. And so I that was very important to me. And that was definitely my experience. I mean, I was hiding the car keys and the imaginary brake, I invented as a child. And so, a lot of kids are sort of stuck in that situation where they have to have a lot more responsibility than they're ready for, but they have no choice. And so I wanted to tell that story.
Well, I know in one of the chapters, when the kids from, the schoolmates come, I guess it was a sleepover. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, God, I hope the mother doesn't wig out, mm-hmm. man. And start drinking and, going through a litany of things, Does the character, the character is comfortable in Puerto Rico, but does she kind of feel, like I had the feeling that she feels, not being able to grasp all of the Spanish, feels kind of like an outsider a little bit, mm-hmm. Being Filipino American. Sometimes I feel that way too, and I've been to the Philippines a couple of times, and what made a difference for me was actually going there. Even though I didn't speak the language, I took a couple of classes, and when I could actually speak and have people understand what I was saying, even a little bit, it just made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And there was a time when I was fluent. I lost it. It's a muscle. I've lived in Vermont 30 years. But it doesn't matter. They still talk. My husband's Native American, French Canadian. They talk to him in Spanish. He doesn't understand a word. They talk to me in English. And my cousin Tere is blonde and very fair haired, and she's fair skinned, and she's 100% Puerto Rican. And so there's always like that assumption that I'm a gringa. And so I definitely deal with that down there. And I can speak the Spanish I speak without an accent. I speak with a Puerto Rican accent. And so that gets me into trouble too, because they take off and I'm like trying to keep up. Can I understand what it's like to live on the island? No. And I'm very careful to not write that experience of a main character, because I can't speak to that. But I do have an understanding from my family, after Maria, that everybody who had any blood from the island felt that one in their body, But I feel any kind of tale I tell that takes place on the island, I'm very conscious. I wrote a short story that takes place in Old San Juan, and I ran it by my cousin Tere, who lived in, it's like I'm careful. My hope as a writer is to encourage more young writers on the island to either, if they write into English or it gets translated, because a lot of the work, there's tremendous work down there, particularly in magical realism and speculative fiction, that's not translated. And so it's not published in the States. And so I just feel like any way that I can help bridge that, I'm going to. You
have a new book that's coming out. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about that and what to look for.
The adult one, or Break Up from Hell?
I think Break Up from Hell, yeah.
Break Up from Hell came out January 3rd, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's a YA horror rom-com. I had a really good time with that. But it also takes a Puerto Rican girl, puts her in Stowe, Vermont. I sort of like that idea. The next adult is called We Need No Wings, and it comes out in October of 24. And the first line of that is the first time she levitated, Tere was in the garden. And so it's about who we are as women when we get to a certain age, when society tells us we're invisible, we have less to offer, we're less attractive, all of that, and the power that actually comes with that. And so it's sort of an exploration of that. All my books sort of have it. I don't know whether all fiction writers do this, but there's some element of truth to me of my life and experience. And I think that lends sort of complexity that, I don't know, or wait, I'm going to run out of material at some point, Tony. Horror is a love of mine because when I was in that difficult time of my life, I read a lot of horror, and I think I thought a lot about why. And I think it's because, my life was difficult. I had way too much responsibility, but at least there weren't zombies. At least there weren't aliens harvesting our blood for fertilizer. It was like I would read these stories and I go, oh, wow, if they can overcome that, so I'm very drawn to that genre for that reason.
The Storyteller's Death, more on the way. Thank you so much, Ann. And for people that want to learn more, do you have a website?
I do, AnnDavilaCardinal.com.
AnnDavilaCardinal.com?
Yes, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. I'm on all of them. TikTok, God help me.
All right.
Book Talk is just very influential, and I've had a lot of support from readers in Book Talk, so I'm there. But I love to connect with readers, and I hope people will check out the book.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we look forward to your next book.
Morning Song. In the morning, when the doves coo back and forth from cage to cage, the light nestles against the wainscoting. Light seems to be dozing, at ease, quiet, as if it could stay there for a lifetime. Its bright splotches fragmented through the window grills, boxed, squared, evenly framed up the wall and halfway along the floor. It presses down, its warm cast over Pepper, our rat terrier, his belly exposed, his head lolled back, content on this March day, when even the caged birds sing, when history quiets, when those at war put down their arms and lift their faces to the light that extends itself like a long arm and says, now, now, as if to comfort us, to let us know today is enough, and love, ever elusive, ever in search of its home, is reaching through the window like the light, extending itself to us.
The voice of Bruce Spang. Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Former poet laureate of Portland, Maine. Next week, I will speak with Sebastian Matthews about his book Travelogue, a photographic journey with unforgettable images taken by his father, Sebastian Matthews. Please join me when I talk to him about how to look at photographs and the many places they were taken. We will also hear from Tony Robles again, who will talk to Jennifer Magaha, author of Flat Broke with Two Goats. You've been listening to Listen and Be Heard on WPVM FM, the voice of Asheville. If you want to be heard, go to listenandbeheard.net. Get in touch. Send me something to play. When I get my radio chops together, I will start taking a few phone calls. The theme music is Living It. Background tracks are by J. Rodriguez Sierra. Thank you for listening.